Last week was Tokyo Game Show, and alongside that we got some standalone related press conferences from both Nintendo and Sony with a Direct and State of Play. And something that week of news really cemented for me is how good 2023 is looking for video games. So I want to take a moment to just go over some of the ones that I am most excited about, and why not start right away with everything Final Fantasy happening next year. There are 3 titles in particular that I am so excited about, all under the Final Fantasy umbrella. Final Fantasy VII Remake was incredible, and I cannot wait to see what Rebirth does next. Minor spoilers at this point, I guess. Remake absolutely goes in a different direction than the original FF7 storyline goes, and so I'm really curious to see how much more it diverges with this next game. FF16 is looking to be the fusion and mashup of Final Fantasy and Devil May Cry that I didn't know I needed and now want so badly. And like I freaked out about my Nintendo Direct reaction video, I can't believe we're actually getting a brand new Theatrhythm on the Switch that's not only incorporating more characters and songs from across the Final Fantasy franchise, but also adding in some amazing music from across other Square Enix properties like Live Alive, the Mana series, the Saga series, and probably the one I'm most excited about, songs from Nier. The fact alone that we're getting 2 major, high-profile Final Fantasy games in 1 year is a lot to take in, and I'm really excited to see how they both turn out. I promise not every single game I'm going to talk about on this list is an RPG, and to prove that, the next one, Street Fighter 6. Street Fighter is another one of those franchises that is just textbook level important to the history of games, and I grew up on that stuff. I played SF2 so much way back in the day on the SNES, and I soaked a lot of time into SF4, fell off a little bit with Street Fighter V, but everything that we've been seeing so far for Street Fighter 6 looks absolutely amazing. The experimentation they're doing with the single player stuff, I think is neat. The character customization looks really cool. That's all well and good, but really just what we're seeing so far for the actual gameplay. Everything looks fluid, smooth, and I think most importantly to me, it really is the one that evokes some of the most feelings of that kind of peak 90s era vibe. Just the way a lot of the art styles handled the music, taking place in Metro City, it feels like something that's really rooted during that kind of peak fighting game craze back then, and has been updated for the modern era both visually and technically. While we don't know for sure yet when in 2023 it'll be launching, I feel like it's going to be in the earlier half of the year just based on the flow of information we've been getting. There's already been a lot of character reveals. We know what the full overall cast of 18 looks like, and out of those, we've already seen 11 characters introduced. There's a closed beta test that's going on very soon, so hopefully that's going to be in our hands on the earlier half of 23, and it's one of the titles I am most looking forward to. Alright, time for another RPG entry already with Iodine Chronicle. If you're not familiar with this one at all, this is a game that was actually kickstarted a couple years ago. It's made by a lot of the dev team that was behind the Suikoden series from Konami, which we now actually know is getting a remaster release sometime next year as well, which I'm really excited for to have that 1 and 2 collection. But Iodine Chronicle is a new game coming out that's based on that same kind of style and flow, similar gameplay, similar combat. One of the big selling points of the Suikoden franchise is the fact that there are 108 characters to recruit, and Iodine's pushing that list a little higher. All of the gameplay trailers have been looking really nice for this one. It's one of those ones that I think manages to do a great mixture of having some classic retro style aesthetic that harkens back to the PS1, but embracing some newer visuals for things like the environments and backgrounds, and having a really dynamic looking battle system visually. There is a prequel game that's already out that you can play right now that's a side-scrolling action game, has a little bit of a Metroidvania vibe to it. It does not reflect the kind of gameplay that's going to be in 100 Heroes, but introduces you to the setting. I had a lot of fun with it, albeit it is a bit repetitive. Maybe worth checking out though right now as we wait, because this game's looking incredible. Okay, time for another not RPG palette cleanser with Resident Evil 4 Remake. Resident Evil is a franchise that I grew up really enjoying and did lose me a little bit in some of their middle years. I didn't really care that much for 5 or 6 or even the side Revelation games, but I am loving everything that they've been doing the last few years. The later titles with 7 and Village were fantastic, and more importantly, the remakes have been on point. Both Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes were phenomenal, and despite the fact that Resident Evil 4 has been re-released and ported to basically every system as many times as possible, I can't help but be excited for a proper full-blown remake that's going to be introducing some new mechanics, changing some things up, maybe even altering the story a little bit. There's already plenty of ways to play the original game, which is arguably the best Resident Evil, and I'm curious to see what some tweaks and changes can do for this renewed experience. If you've been sleeping on the other remake work they've been doing, stop it. Go and play those right away. 2 especially is, I think, one of the best remakes ever, just in terms of how it takes the base content and really brings it into a new style of game, and it's part of the reason why I have such high hopes, and I'm looking forward to see what they do with 4. Alright, RPG time again, but not a Japanese one this time, now a Western RPG that is the latest sequel to a beloved older franchise, Baldurs Gate 3. Despite using the Baldurs Gate name, this is actually a different dev team from the previous titles, and is being made by Larian, who recently is most known for some of the later Divinity games like Original Sin 2. The style of gameplay they've been doing in the recent titles is some of the closest I've seen to kind of tabletop video game experience being brought into a video game that just really translates the freedom of what you can try to do and some of the sillier shenanigans you can use to tackle different problems and challenges. And for the past couple years, Baldur's Gate 3 has been available in early access, slowly adding more content over time, upgrading the visuals, adding more things you can do and choose from, more classes to play as, and everything has just been an absolute treat. I've been keeping up with all the different major updates, not necessarily playing all of the content every single time, but just trying out the new stuff here and there. And with a planned release date of next year, I can't wait to see what the final product looks like. There's a few things they've still been keeping close to the chest, additional playable companions, obviously the later chapters and where the story's going to go. There's a couple classes we're still waiting to see added. The early access has just been a complete delight to keep up with, and if it's any indication what the final product is going to look like, I think we're in for something that's going to be a big deal when it finally launches. Next up, Like a Dragon Ishin. This was one of the reveals that came out of Sony's State of Play last week, and it was honestly my personal favorite thing they revealed. I very recently somewhat got into the Yakuza series very heavily. I played all the games back to back in 2021, and I now just hunger for more content. And Ishin in particular is something really exciting because this is actually a game that was previously released during the end of the PS3 life cycle into the start of the PS4. It was a side game that was only released in Japan. That's not really a traditional Yakuza game. It's actually a historical period drama that recasts a lot of historical figures using characters from the Yakuza franchise, which we're now just calling Like a Dragon, which was actually the original name in Japan anyways. What's really interesting about this game coming out in the West finally is that not only is it getting translated and brought over, it's also receiving a full remake treatment using a different engine than the original game and adding more characters from later titles playing more roles in it. While there were a lot of great announcements from TGS last week, I think this is actually my personal favorite. And really, if you've been missing out on the Yakuza franchise and haven't tried any of them, go pick up Zero right now or play the Kiwamis. They're on PlayStation Plus Premium, they're on Game Pass. There's a lot of ways to play these games very easily and quickly. They are excellent, and just get ready to join the hype train for Ishin. Now, for an RPG with JRPG roots, but made by a Western studio, and is the smallest studio out of all the games that I'm talking about today, Sea of Stars. This was another Kickstarter game that I backed actually a couple years ago. It's from Sabotage, which is the same team behind The Messenger, which is their only other game released thus far. But whereas The Messenger was a 2D platforming game, giving a lot of love to Metroidvanias as well as ninja side-scrolling titles, Sea of Stars is their attempt at recreating the golden era of JRPGs. Chrono Trigger in particular looks to be a very strong influence for this title, along with some other games like Super Mario RPG, and everything shown so far for it is beautiful. The visual aesthetic of the game is incredible. There's been some music samples for things like the battle themes, which sound great, and just already knowing the kind of quality that this team is capable of with what they did with The Messenger, which had incredible gameplay, this wonderful balance writing-wise between humor and serious parts, just seeing that brought over to a genre that I'm just even more into is something that I'm really excited to see. Another game I'm really looking forward to next year is the sequel to something that was actually a really big pleasant surprise for me, Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I grew up loving the Star Wars films. The original trilogy in particular was just a very formative part of my childhood, and every time there's been new stuff coming out, I get excited for it, and there's been a mixture of some successes and some not really successes, but Fallen Order was one of those games that I didn't really have the highest expectations going into, and it completely blew me away. Borrowing some influence from Dark Souls style games, adding in some more platforming and exploration mechanics, along with its own original story, everything just came together so wonderfully for that game. And while we haven't seen any real gameplay for Survivor just yet, we've really just had CG trailers, assuming we're going to be seeing a continuation of that style and see the story moving forward, and, you know, I don't know, maybe figure out why this character never shows up after a certain point in the timeline for obvious, probably dark reasons. I can't wait to see what happens next. Plus, it introduced one of my personal favorite droids in the Star Wars universe with BD-1, which I actually recently built out of Legos. There's just a lot of charm that first game had, and I think the next one has a potentially very bright future ahead for it. One last RPG, but another very different kind of one with Starfield. You know, about a month ago, I made a whole video just dedicated talking about my love for Bethesda RPGs. Morrowind is still one of my top 5 games of all time, and I love everything that's come out after it. There are some changes in later games that are a little more give and take for me, and, you know, push it a little further away from what I liked about the older ones, but generally still there is a sense of freedom and replayability that just isn't really captured in any other franchise for me. And what makes Starfield especially interesting is the fact that it is something completely brand new. While there's obviously room for experimentation and changes in new directions for the Elder Scrolls and Fallout series, Starfield is this carte blanche situation where, yeah, we know the general premise is going to be in space, we've already seen a little bit of gameplay, but there's a lot of things it could potentially do different from the others to really set it apart, and some of it we've already seen looks really cool, like being able to customize your own ship. This was one of the titles we were supposed to get in 2022, and it was delayed into early 23, which is honestly, in my mind, always the better choice. I'd rather wait for a game that's going to be completely fully realized and good, although knowing Bethesda, still going to have a couple bugs at the start, more than likely, but definitely fewer than if it launched with its original intended date of this holiday season, and I'm really curious to see how this one lands and how it stakes its claim against the very strong lineage of Bethesda titles. Final game, kind of an obvious one of the most anticipated games that was supposed to come out this year and got delayed repeatedly, again and again and again, but we're finally getting it in May of next year, fingers crossed. Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I feel like this is one of those games where I really don't need to rant that much about why I'm excited for it. I mean, Breath of the Wild was such a huge deal for the Switch. It was part of the reason why the system had such a strong opening boom. There are so many things it did right in terms of reinventing the Zelda formula, and while there is a part of me that is curious to see another new entry at some point that plays a little more like some of the older, more traditional games, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't looking forward to more of what Breath of the Wild did right and seeing even more mechanics and new things introduced as part of that. There are so many different wild theories about what might be happening and the storyline for this game, the little bits and pieces that we've seen here and there. There's just no denying that Zelda is amongst the strongest franchises that Nintendo has to work with, and finally getting another mainline launch this far into the Switch lifecycle is something to be very excited about. So those are the 10, kind of 12 games that I'm really excited about for next year. There's honestly so many more that I'm really excited about that just didn't quite make the cut because I was trying to keep this not be too long of a ranty video, but Tekken 8, Fire Emblem Engage, Wolong, Assassin's Creed Mirage, there is so much going on next year. So much so that honestly, if nothing else got confirmed for next year, I think we'd already have a really strong one set out, and there's plenty of time for even more to get revealed. Or, you know, maybe some of these get pushed back and end up being 24. Whatever. I'm excited to play them whenever they come out. Till next time, let me know what you guys think. What games are you looking forward to next year? What's some of the stuff that you cannot wait to get your hands on? As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit that thumbs up button to let me know. Thumbs down if you didn't, good for me to know. Subscribe if you haven't yet, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys later.